Hello and welcome to What's on My Mind with Fiona. I'm your host, Fiona Kane. Today, I'm actually talking about Adolescence, which is a four-part series that is on Netflix. If you haven't watched it yet, there'll be spoilers here. So just have an awareness of that. You might want to go and watch it first and then come back to me. It's only 4 episodes. So it's an easily bingeable series. And actually, you will want to binge it because it's kind of you're glued to the screen when you watch this. But please be aware, here on in, there will be spoilers. So if you don't want spoilers, go and watch it first, then come back and watch or listen to this episode. So the first thing I can say is that it is brilliant. It is gripping and brilliant, and all around, the acting all around is amazing. Everyone involved. There's a few standout actors in it, though. One is Stephen Graham, and actually, I probably should talk a bit about what it's about. Then I'll talk about the actors to make a bit more sense. But essentially, what it is about is it's a crime drama about a 13-year-old boy who gets accused of murdering a schoolgirl, a girl at his school, and so it's sort of the very first episode is the SWAT team or whatever you call the team anyway. But the team arrives at the house and breaks down the door and arrests this boy. On the suspicion of murder, and it's a shock, and it's like the family are reeling, and what's going on? And so there's a mum and dad and sister in this, and the father, who is Stephen Graham, is the actor who plays the father. Phenomenal acting, phenomenal, right from the beginning, right through to the father. The very final scene of the fourth episode, the very final scene with the father, is heartbreaking and beautiful and amazing. And oh wow, just what a amazing actor. And so is the boy who plays the 13-year-old. This is apparently his first acting role. And when you do watch the series, the third episode is actually was his first acting. That was the first thing they filmed. And it's one of those things that they film in like the one take style. So each episode is like one take. So that's amazing just from that point of view as well. Just the interesting way it was filmed. They're describing it as a technical masterpiece, and I would agree with that. The way they filmed it. Not that I know, I'm such a technical person when it comes to films. No, of course, that's not my expertise. But anyway, I think they're right when they say that it's amazing, and it's not. So it's not fancy as in flipping from scene to scene, because it's one take. In one way, you could think that makes it slow, but it actually it doesn't. It's kind of, it slows down the pace sort of, but it still is. Well, it's only 4 episodes. It still quite moves along quite quickly. Is quite gripping. And but that boy, that the third episode is most of it is him, the boy, and a therapist. And that actress, I don't have a name in front of me, but she's amazing as well. So most of that episode is him and her playing off each other. Apparently, that was his very first time in an acting studio, and he plays this amazing, amazing part. You've got to see it to understand what I'm talking about. But essentially, what the film is looking at, it is looking at what they refer to now as incel culture. And for those of you who haven't heard of it, incel is a term they use for involuntary celibate. So essentially, it is an identity. Some people have taken it as identity, and others it's just used as a way of labeling someone or making fun of someone. But it's essentially, the term is used against boys and men. I don't think it's really one used against women, but I could be wrong. I think it's mostly used against boys and men. And essentially, it's picking on men and boys who can't find a partner. So involuntary celibate. And what has happened with this in the last few years, what has happened is, I know a lot of things have brought this about. And actually, I will go into that a little bit more in a moment. But I just want to get back to the some of the other themes in the show itself, and I'll go back to talk about the incel thing. What it shows in this, I suppose the most. I suppose there's a couple of themes. One theme is the theme of rage, male rage, and that does feed into the incel thing, which I can and will talk about. But the other thing is that you think that your child being in their bedroom is the safest place for them to be. But with our online world now, it is simply not. And I think we've got to the point where you must know what your children are doing and you must know what they're doing on their phones, on their computers, that sort of thing, because these kids have access to a whole world that you don't realize that they have access to. I'm being told that, by 10 years old, most kids have seen porn. I just can't even imagine that. Like, I remember myself personally, I was on a school trip, like a school excursion type thing where we went to Canberra for a few days, which is a typical thing in Australia. You go to Canberra, which is our capital, to go and visit things like State Library and Parliament House and that sort of stuff, right? And we were staying in a motel, myself and a couple of girlfriends of mine, and someone found a magazine on the top of a wardrobe, and it was some sort of, I don't know, Playboy or Penthouse or something like that, right? And I saw a naked picture of a man in there, and that's the first time I'd ever seen a naked man. It was horrifying. And I think I was maybe 14 or something. So, wow, times have changed. But and now these kids are seeing hardcore porn well and truly by the time they've got to that age. And I think that that's part of what's affecting children. And even actually in Sydney, not in Sydney, actually in Melbourne in the last couple of weeks, an acquaintance of mine who I suppose is what you'd call a Facebook friend, but I don't really know where I know her from, but she's a Facebook friend acquaintance. She's based in Melbourne, and she's been talking about her daughter who in school, she's in year 7, which is first year of high school in Australia, and usually around 12 to 13 in year 7. And she has, through the school, because they've got laptops, as kids are given laptops or have to buy laptops, but they have laptops in their school classroom. And what they've all done is these kids, they've downloaded some games on their laptop, so they've bypassed some protective system that stops them from doing it. They've downloaded these games and they're chatting, and and I suppose a chat feature that the games have. So I just don't know anything about these games and chat features and stuff in these games, but they're chatting in those, and she's been threatened in those chats. And in her first, like, school only started in Australia, she would have only been at school for 8 weeks or 6 weeks or something like that, and she's already been threatened with rape several times by boys. So 13-year-old boys threatening to rape her, and using really full-on language. And this is just something, you know, would I don't know, 13-year-old boys wouldn't have even known what that was at one point, I feel. And now they're being exposed to this sort of stuff. And the problem with much of porn these days is to make it more and more shocking that it is more and more shocking. So it's kind of not the old fashioned, when I finally did see porn when I was younger, the old fashioned porn, it still was shocking, I suppose, to a point, but most of it was just kind of regular, I suppose what you'd call regular sex. But now it's all of this rape type porn and strangulation and all sorts of stuff, right? So this is what children are being exposed to. So anyway, it is a look at these stuff that children are exposed to and how that affects them. But yeah, I was just saying that's happening in Melbourne at the moment. And it's happening all over the place. It's not just there. So yeah, children are being exposed to stuff way too young. They don't really know how to deal with it. They're acting out all sorts of inappropriate and some harmful and aggressive behaviours towards girls or towards others at school, and this film is looking at that. And what it's also looking at, there's a beautiful scene where the parents are kind of coming to terms with, did we do this? How did this happen? And it's beautifully done in that. In one way, they say, well, it's not our fault. And of course, they didn't deliberately create a child who would murder. But on the other hand, they made mistakes or missed things, like not understanding about what he was doing on his computer in his room, and sort of just trusting that he was safe there. And the father has, in this series, does have an anger issue, and he's not unusual for his generation, right? He'd be about my age, so he's turning 50 in the show, and so he's just a few years younger than me. And this character sort of says, well, his father used to beat him up. He would never do that to his kids, which he doesn't. But does have anger issues, and with his anger issues, he'll sort of smash something up, or he will act out and do something silly or whatever, but and aggressive, but not aggressive towards his family. But at the same time, that's what he was. I suppose that's what he was modeling to his son, wasn't it? So the father doesn't know how to deal with his emotions, and although he doesn't do anything really bad, and he's not harming people, and he's not, not beating up his family or anything like that. Obviously the father never learned how to manage his issues. He just did the best he could to not be as bad as his own father, but that models that towards a son who also has anger issues. So essentially, the parents kind of admitted that it's not. They're not really responsible, but they sort of are as well. Like, I suppose it's like sometimes two things can be true at the same time, that you're not really, and you can't fully blame yourself, but on some level, there's got to be a level of responsibility. Somewhere, I don't know, it's an in between thing, something like that. But I think it was beautifully done in a way of kind of going, well, we didn't stop him in his bedroom, and maybe we should have spent more time, and all the rest of it. And saying that too, I understand that, on one side of things, I think with parents at the moment, you know, I really think that gone are the days where you can not know what your kids are doing. Gone are the days where you can say, well, I don't understand these computer thingies. The kids do it. I'm sure it's fine. Or we put on some lock, so I'm sure it's fine. I just think gone are the days where we can do that and feel safe that that's what is true. At the same time, I also know that more than ever at the moment in the world, with high interest rates and all sorts of financial issues around the globe, that for many families, both parents do need to work to make ends meet, and they work long hours. And so it is really, really hard to be completely present for children these days for many parents. So obviously, ideally, you are very present and you really do know what's going on for them. But what I'm trying to say is, I'm not judging people when that's not always possible. It's really hard. And I suppose you have to do it the best you can within your circumstances. And some people are single parents and working, and, all of the rest of it. So it is really tough. So, no judgment there. I'm not a parent. I haven't had to do it. So, my hat's off to you. But that's the world this is the world we're living in, and that's, I suppose, what this series brings up is that issue. It's that issue of, well, what's going on with the kids these days that wasn't happening before, and how do we need to address this? And as parents, can we just sort of assume they're safe? Well, probably not. So then, what needs to happen? And so, and where do schools come into this? All of that. So these are discussions that we really do need to be having right now. And Jonathan Haidt has written a great book about, I think it's called The Anxious Generation, where he talks about this. And it's really worth looking at if you're interested in this topic, or if you have children. He's got very definite recommendations about when children should be accessing the internet and social media and all those kinds of things. So the father and son in this film are brilliant. Therapist is brilliant, because throughout this particular episode that the therapist is in this child, you really do start to see the anger that this child has, and this boy is so good at showing that. So going back and forth between this kind of innocent child to quite quite scary, angry person. And that, he's even kind of playing games where whenever he feels vulnerable, he starts trying to dominate and undermine this therapist and stuff. And it's like just amazing acting for someone who's never done it before. Phenomenal. You say it was amazing for someone who'd been an actor for years, let alone someone who hasn't done it before. So I can only see that that's the career. If that child wants to continue as an actor, his career is going to be amazing. Yeah, just amazing. But so I suppose it's just all of these social questions that come up, and it also gives you an idea It isn't focused on the girl who died. A little bit it is, and it's focused on a little bit with from like her best friend and how it's affected her best friend, but it's not focused at all on her family, that kind of thing. And that's just not the focus of this. The focus of this is all about the devastation to the family that has the perpetrator in their home, and I suppose it's just a different. It's just looking at from a different way, and it's looking at this. What happens for the family as well, how hard it is for them to be in this situation, and how their lives change as well, even though they didn't do anything wrong, unless you argue that not understanding fully what the child was doing, but they didn't overtly do anything wrong, and they're getting blamed, especially the sister. It's not her fault, but they're getting blamed and they're getting a hard time as well. And this is really tough. And I have seen it in my own life. I had a friend who was murdered when she was 19. Lovely Cherie. She's a lovely girl, and I won't go into all the details. However, so I've seen, this thing does affect families and friends, and besides, obviously, the person involved. But the other side of the coin is I have a friend whose brother is responsible for a murder that happened, I think, last year, and or maybe the year before, but sometime in the last year or so. And that's also I'm seeing now how much that affects the family of the person who does this crime as well. So I suppose another way of saying this is there's many victims when a crime like this happens, and the family of the perpetrator can be just as much victims as the perpetrators, as the family of the victim and everyone else involved. So, but this film is more focused on the family of this boy who is the perpetrator. And it is just really, really shocking and really, really well done. Now, what they're referring to in this show, which I'll get back to what I was talking about before with incel culture. So essentially, look, there's always been that culture of maybe young men who had trouble getting girlfriends, that sort of thing. And there's always been an issue with especially very young men, because it depends on when they it depends on when they mature. And sometimes, that I know certainly in sort of high school situations, there's a small percentage of boys that girls are attracted to. It's often the ones who are a bit more mature, or like mature looking. I mean, in looks, and maybe they've grown into themselves more. They're a bit taller, a bit a bit more manly, and girls also they're just interested in maybe even sort of more dangerous and more exciting boys at that age. And so the ones who look like little boys, who aren't very exciting for young girls. And of course, generally speaking, as we get older, girls get over the bad boy because they realize he's not good for them, and they do go looking for the good boy, as it were. And by then, a few years later, they've all caught up and the boys have grown up, and so it's often the good guy gets the girl eventually, but not so much in a high school situation. So there's always been that kind of thing. I suppose it's more pronounced now because there's a big online world, and because of a whole bunch of things to do with the world and money and all sorts of things. There's now a whole sort of subsection of young men, and women as well, but this is about the men who stay home until they're 30, if not longer. And so there's this whole kind of idea of like the basement dwelling man who lives in his parents' basement or his mum's basement and plays computer games all day and trolls people on social media, and sits there kind of eating Cheetos and pizza or whatever, and often he's, if you get the idea, the guy who doesn't go out and do any exercise or get any sun or eat well, he potentially is, quite unattractive looking young man, and so that's kind of, this is the idea when people talk about incels, it's someone like him that they're talking about, right? Someone like that. And what happens though, because of our online world, the good and bad things come out of online, but there's now a whole lot of, for want of a better word, influencers who start up groups, who start up programs or start up courses and things to help young men. and some of them are very good, like Jordan Peterson, who just gives really sensible information and to make your bed and take responsibility and learn how to have a shower and wash yourself and show up and you know be responsible for your emotions and yourself. So there's people like him, but then there's people like the Tate brothers, like Andrew Tate, who is a bit more on the aggressive side of things, and a real man is a he-man, and it's a little bit too over the top that way, right? And I'm sure there's other people like that, and other probably more extreme people as well. And I saw a series, I think it was on Netflix as well. It was about, I can't remember what it was called now. It was only out about a month or so ago, but it was about young men getting plastic surgery and like measuring like they were measuring, is it the frenum? I don't even know what it's called, but like it was a really big deal. The length of the spot between your nose and your mouth made a big difference between how attractive you were, apparently. And so they were kind of like, oh, well, they're essentially going on this group chat and measuring themselves and realizing that they're too short. So they need to get their legs lengthened, or they don't have the wrong shape of their face. So they need to go and get some facial surgery or whatever. And these boys are getting quite obsessed with that. And they refer to it in the show a few times, the 80-20. And the 80-20 is that 80% of women are attracted to 20% of the men, which is apparently a stat that they're told a lot in these worlds. And it's probably partially true to a certain degree as well. It's one of those things because there is that you see young women, particularly these influencer type women, and if you ever watch podcasts like the Whatever podcast or anything like that, a lot of these girls are very much like, oh, I want 6, 6, and 6. And 6 is like 6 foot tall, six pack, and six figures. So a guy who's earning a lot of money, 6 foot tall, and has a six pack. And so there is a certain subset of girls, especially of a certain age and a certain no, well, anyway, a certain subset of girls who are attracted to men, young men or men like that, or not even young men, just men, right? And so these sort of average normal boys and average normal men don't get seen in that. In saying that, again, over time, like majority of women are just attracted to regular men, and over time, even the ones who are attracted to those so-called perfect men kind of realize they're not perfect for so long, because generally speaking, many, not all, but many of the men in that category, because they know they can have whoever they want, they're not very kind to these women. So when these women realize that they're not going to be looked after with these men and it's kind of short-lived and whatever, then they usually go for looking for a real man. And generally speaking, when women are looking for a real man, it's not necessarily about his looks. That might be part of it, but it's actually about whether or not they feel safe with him and whether they feel safe marrying him, trusting him, having a family with him, all that stuff. And that's where the good guy, as it were, comes back into the picture. So they are taught a lot of this stuff about how women aren't attracted to men, and so they've got no hope and whatever. And while there's some truth in that with some women and with this weird kind of online world, it's not completely true. It's also the reason I suppose it seems more true, and it is more true in some ways, is because once upon a time you would grow up in your neighborhood and you'd probably meet someone in your neighborhood and marry that person, someone who lived nearby, someone who lived in the same city. That was more common, right? And that was just what you would do. But these days, what happens with all these sort of OnlyFans girls and stuff is these young women really can sell themselves to the highest bidder. So they can be flying off to parties in Dubai or wherever. And so the market that they have is, rather than, they don't have to settle for the young boy that they met at the local RSL. They can market themselves to these men in other places. But like I said, the type of women that would be attracted to that and the type of men who would be attracted to that, it's kind of a short-lived thing. So eventually these girls realize that that's not really that much fun being treated that way, and they want normal guys. So I understand why the guys believe this is true. I think the internet dropped out for a moment. Hopefully it's all right. I understand why these guys think it's true, but it's not quite as simple as that. So that's what they were referring to. They're referring to the incel culture, and this boy mentioned the 80-20 thing a couple of times, or maybe he and another boy mentioned it. So the boys are kind of being told at a very young age that they're not going to be able to find a girl, and they're not wanted, and they're not going to be wanted, not going to be loved. No one's going to want to touch them or be with them. And this is while there are some tricky things around that might be true, largely it's not true. It's not true forever anyway. And it's a really poor message to give them. The other issue too is, and this is like a whole other podcast on its own, but it's some of the challenges around some of the negatives in regards to feminism. And there's lots of good things that have, or maybe some good things that have come around from feminism, but some bad things in that some types of feminism are all about demonizing men and turning masculinity into something that is toxic, and just sort of having men left, right, and center apologize just for being men, because apparently there's something wrong with that. And I think that I haven't got the quote in front of me, but I think that Jordan Peterson was right. He said something along the lines of, you know, a dangerous man is a good man, but in the it's probably not exactly those words, but along the lines of, actually, I'm just going to look it up. Hang on. Yeah, I found it. I thought I may as well be accurate in this. So what Jordan Peterson said is, a harmless man is not a good man. A good man is a very dangerous man who has that under voluntary control. And I think he's exactly right. And essentially, what that means is, and if you think about men's role, especially men's role historically, men had to go out, and they still do in some cases, go out and fight wars. They're the ones that go out and they protect the family, and they're going to go and fight the battles, or deal with the tribe coming to attack you, whatever it is, or protect their women and protect their children. So men do have to have the potential of being dangerous. That's also why they're really good at things like rescuing and fire and rescue, and you want a man who's got the capability of being dangerous, because that means he can, he's strong enough and fierce enough to save people and help people and do all things that actually are a wonderful role that men can offer. But you also want him to have that under voluntary control, so he's not harmful. He uses his strength and his power and his ability to be dangerous in the right way. And in the same breath, what he talks about is, a harmless man is actually not a good man. A harmless man, I think, can be dangerous by being so harmless, to tell you the truth. Sometimes harmless men can be problematic. And so I think we've got a very confused idea of masculinity at the moment, and men are trying to find their way. Young men are trying to find their way, and that's what this show is explaining here. So I think we do need to have think about the way we talk about men, because what we've done is we're finally saying, and it's something I talk about a lot on here, because I'm talking about, the trans issue and some of the terrible men involved in that. There are a lot of things historically that men have done and that men are doing now that are very harmful to women and very harmful, and they should be called out and they should be arrested and that should be dealt with. However, we cannot just write off a whole, like say, all men do things, because there are actually really harmful women as well. So let's not just write off all men or make men feel apologetic just for existing, because that's not helpful to anyone. And we don't want to, because what's happening a lot is, like I said before, harmless men. We don't want to breed men who are just women. We don't want to breed, or we don't, just women, I suppose, is the wrong way of putting it, because women aren't necessarily weak or any of those things. What am I trying to say? We don't want to breed men who are useless. We don't want to breed men who don't know their power or own their power or know how to stand in their power. It's not healthy for society. That does not help our society. So because a lot of the kind of feminist stuff has been really about I think damaging men and reducing men, and that's not helpful. Having men who are reduced and demeaned and that kind of thing, actually that's what creates a dangerous man, right? That's what creates them, and that's what it's showing here, is that these men who were being picked on for being incels are the angry young men of today, or one of those subsets of angry young men who are and will and become an issue. Anyway, I've gone on for long enough. Please watch Adolescence. It is brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. And yeah, we need to think about all of these issues in our society at the moment. I hope you have a good week, and I'll talk to you soon. Please like, subscribe, share, and all that stuff. Thanks. Bye.